So I would like to start by saying that let me quote this author, Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was an American essayist, lecturer, philosopher, and a poet during the 19th century, who said that the secret of education lies in respecting the pupil. So with due respect to all of you here, I may start this lecture. I am asked to speak today on conducting of the suits and trials in civil matters. I was informed that most listeners were either interns or freshers, and I have therefore tried to simplify as much as possible. Since the topic has been very vast, I thought we could divide it into two sessions, probably, namely the conduct of the suit and conduct of the trial. I have divided the topic of conducting of the suit in two parts. Number one is that the exercise to be undertaken prior to the filing of the suit, and secondly, the actions to be undertaken after filing of the suit. So basically, when we are looking at conducting a suit, it is something prior to the filing of the suit and then thereafter. So now let us look at prior to the filing of the suit. If I may start from the point where the client meets the advocate. So it would simplify our understanding from that point of time. Going to the lecture, it means that a client is explaining his case. He comes and explains his case to the advocate. So the advocate essentially understands the ins and outs of the client's case. Having understood the case, the advocate must call for and verify all the documents that the client has to refer to and rely upon in support of his case. So one has to really have due diligence, take and make that extra effort and call upon their clients to get all the documents, and the advocate must necessarily verify all these documents which his client is referring to and relying upon in support of this case. Thereafter, the lawyer must collect all these documents and arrange them chronologically and create a list of dates and events. Now, this is another exercise which the lawyer must do very diligently, and in order to ascertain that there is no suppression of either facts or documents by the client. This is the first aspect of the meeting with the client directly. After looking at all the documents and understanding the case of your clients, one goes to the next step, which is issuance of the notice. Now, once one has to issue a notice to the opposite party, what is it supposed to contain? Basically, it depends on the facts and circumstances of each case, where you may or may not issue a notice to the other side before filing of the suit. Normally, in India, in the present day and age, one would have to file a suit whether you give a notice or not. However, there are circumstances and there are times when, if the client is lucky, I must say, the matter may get settled by virtue of sending of this notice. There is a possibility that the other side may be able to convince the client, or his client rather, what his position or status to that case would be. Since litigation takes a long period of time, especially suits, people would say that we will consider it as and when we have to decide. So therefore, normally one would have to file a suit, and one does not have the luxury of settling the matter at the notice stage. Now, in the event that one has to send a notice to the client, let us go to the contents of the notice and understand what are the contents of the notice that the lawyer must put into the notice before sending it. So before he prepares for the notice, I would suggest that he studies and verifies all the communications that have been exchanged between the parties. So it may be by emails, it may be MSs, it may be registered AD letters or letters which are hand delivered, etc. It is very, very important to go through these correspondences and verify their correctness at the stage of writing of the notice. It is very important. I would say that the notice is a very important stage. It must mention all the material facts of the case, the documents that your client is going to refer to and rely upon, which have been exchanged between the parties relating to the case. Now, apart from these two aspects, I would suggest that it would be extremely significant to mention your interpretation to any ambiguity which arises either in the communication between the parties and or any communication or any document or a clause in a document which has any kind of an ambiguity according to you. So at this stage itself, it is important that you put in a clarification with regard to that ambiguity, whether it may be as in by way of a clause in a document, or it may be a particular interpretation which you would want to give to the communication which you have already given or received. This client's point of view and or your point of view has to be communicated in the notice. Now, the next aspect of the notice has to be that you need to very specifically set out your case. You may place your averments, your contentions, your allegations in the notice very, very specifically. So whatever you would want to tell the other side, you must put it in so many words. Give relevant particulars if possible. Heads of claims, if you have any, should also be put into your notice. This aspect is very, very crucial to a case, and we will see that in the trial, when conducts a trial, this becomes a very crucial aspect and may turn a case around. On the other hand, if one does not disclose these facts, it may have a very adverse impact on the case. You may give sufficient time to the opposite party to revert to your notice. So having sent the notice, I would say that when you send a notice, it has to be by email, by SMS, and by registered AD. Having sent the notice, you should give the opposite party sufficient time to revert so as to not be told subsequently that, sir, you had not given us sufficient time to revert and we were unable to revert to your notice and you have filed a case in a hurried manner. So I would suggest that a minimum of 15-day period be given after you give a notice to the other side. The content of the notice may also have inspection of documents which you may refer to and rely upon, or communications. So you may also, the notice may also contain a request for inspection of documents so that you can check that documents, and if there is any ambiguity in your mind or there is a doubt, that also can be cleared. So these are the contents, and the notice once sent is a major part of your litigation to the other side. it has a lot of bearing as such. The next stage after this, we assume that there is no reply, or assuming that there is a reply, you may have to file a rejoinder. And ultimately, after having given a rejoinder notice or your say to the reply that you have to, you may consider filing a plaint. Now, for students, it is important that before you file a plaint, now whether it is students or freshers, whoever it is, one must, as a matter of fact, look at the Civil Procedure Code, which is necessarily to be looked at before filing of the plaint. Today's day and age, people look up the Google and they check out as to what all things have to be done. I would say that, of course, it is a shortcut, but it would be preferred if the Civil Procedure Code commentary is looked at before filing of the case. So it's a large book, and I accept that it's sometimes overwhelming to look at it and get lost. But let me guide you here. Qua this. So what happens is that once we look at the Civil Procedure Code, let me straight away take you to what are the contents that you need to look up in the code to decide as to how the plaint has to be filed. So the Civil Procedure Code, if you look at Order 1, Rule 1, you would get the topic who may be joined as a plaintiff. Order 1, Rule 3 would give us contents of who may be joined as defendants. Order 27 to 35, read with Chapter 14 to 17 of the High Court rules, would deal with the suit against different parties. As to whoever is the party, you have the different options available. So please look at which is your case, what is it falling under, and then decide. This particular decision can be taken after reading Order 27 to Order 35, read with chapters 14 to 17 of the High Court rules. So this gives you an idea of how do you start the suit. Then it is a question of framing of the suit. Now this framing of the suit as to how to frame it is given in Order 2 of the CPC. So kindly go through the provisions of Order 2 to decide as to what would be the frame of your suit. After having considered that, one should look at Order 2, Rule 2, which essentially says that the suit must include the entire claim with regard to the cause of action. So if you have not claimed a part of your claim, or you have not claimed the whole of it, then necessarily you are required to take the leave of the court under Order 2, Rule 2, and that must be pleaded as a clause in the plaint. If the leave is not taken, then your subsequent suit under the same cause of action against the same parties would be barred by the principles of res judicata. So this is an important rule one must bear in mind and must necessarily plead if you have not claimed the entire claim as per your client's interest and your instructions. Then one has to look at Order 4, which talks about institutions of suits. Now, the next point is with regard to the pleadings. Order 6 would tell you about the pleadings generally. Order 7 would talk about the plaint, which can be read with Chapter 4 of the High Court rules, and more particularly Rules 69 to 87. So these are the basic provisions of the CPC and the High Court rules, which I would request either the interns or the freshers or any lawyer. The plaint would essentially be a statement of facts and documents. So what you need to put in is your simple facts and the documents which you rely upon to present your case to the court. Let me put it that if there is a case of fraud in particular, which is alleged by a person, then you must give the particulars of the same and you must need to plead it specifically. You can't simply have vague allegations based on conjectures and surmises. You have to plead that specifically. If you do not, there would be no case made out and you may not be able to plead it in the affidavit of evidence which would be required during trial, because it can be argued that it was not set out specifically and therefore there was no occasion for the opposite party to deny it or give an explanation to the same. So that is extremely essential. Now, once you have made your pleadings, what you need to include in your plaint, there are some basic clauses without which the plaint would be incomplete. So there are the clauses with regard to jurisdiction. There would be a clause with regard to limitation. There would be another clause which would say that there is no other suit against the same parties which has been filed in the court. The other clause would be with regard to the court fees, which would essentially consider the valuation of the suit. So these are the essential clauses which are very, very crucial for filing of the plaint. Without these clauses, the plaint would be essentially incomplete. Now, having completed this aspect, we have to go towards the prayers. The prayers are required to contain final reliefs. What is the final relief that your client is seeking? That has to be laid down in very specific terms. Apart from those reliefs, we have to also claim interim reliefs. So reliefs which you would require to claim at the interregnum or in the interim stage before the hearing is complete and before the suit is set for final hearing is what you need to place. There is another important clause or prayer that you need to put in is a prayer for costs of the suit. Very important, because ultimately at the end of the day, if you succeed and if you have not prayed for costs, then the party may not be given costs or it may be left to the decision of the court, which may be a very small amount. It may not be a full amount. So a prayer for actual costs would be very essential. And if you have actually incurred certain costs, that also requires to be pleaded, or whatever damages that you have gone through already before filing of the plaint, then those particulars are definitely required to be put in the parties to get a proper relief. One more important clause, as in by way of a general player, would be required is that the court would grant us such further and other relief as the court may deem fit and proper in the facts and circumstances of the case. So this particular clause or prayer enables or entitles a party to amend the plaint in future after having filed it in the event it requires to add any particular player which it has not added at the inception or rather filing of the suit. So this would also enable to get an additional relief from the court if you are able to convince the court that yes, this is also a relief which you are entitled to get. So this would complete the plaint as such. This would be a complete plaint which is then required to be filed. Now, having considered this, the next part is the acceptance of the plaint, or rather filing of the plaint and getting it registered and numbered. So the advocate has to go and file the case, get it registered, and there are the court or the court associate or the registry will look at some aspects such as the jurisdiction, limitation, res judicata, and then finally, if it goes through all the objections are removed, then it would go ahead and register a case. Having registered the case, one important leg of the entire suit is completed. The next leg is to serve this plaint along with the summons to the defendant. So Order 5, read with Chapter 6 of the High Court rules, more particularly rules 69 to 87, deal with the service of summons to the other side. Now, having served the plaint, you would also have to give a notice and to the other side. Now, there is a possibility that there may be an appearance and the other side may file a wakalat of the advocate who would want to appear for him in the matter, and or the party may appear in person. So Order 3 is to be looked at for appearance of parties through their pleaders. That may be considered and looked at for the purposes of summons and appearance. So having completed this entire aspect of filing of the plaint, serving of the summons, you are now ready for the hearing of your case before the court. So you need to give a precipice to the court and set out whatever reliefs that you are seeking at the interregnum. That is, having filed a suit, the interim reliefs that you require for the purposes of your case, without which a grave prejudice would be caused to you during the time that the suit has not been heard. This interim proceeding is called interlocutory proceeding. Let me explain the different provisions which are there in the CPC for this interlocutory proceeding. So what is the nature of reliefs that generally one would ask during the interlocutory proceedings? One is under Order 38, that is attachment before judgment. This can be read along with Chapter 21 of the High Court rules, and more particularly rules 307 to 312. The second provision is Order 39, which is for temporary injunctions and interlocutory orders. So where you would want to prevent a party from doing a particular thing or want a party to do a particular thing, then this particular provision is relevant. The next provision is Order 40, which is for appointment of receiver. That can be read along with Chapter 30 of the High Court rules, namely rules 589 to 599. These three are essentially the interlocutory reliefs which a person may seek in the case in the High Court. A similar set of rules are also given by the City Civil Court, which is called the Civil Manual. And the same kind of prayers are even there. Even the same kind of rules are there. Similar provisions are given in the Civil Manual. I'm not going into that because if I go into each of the courts, then that would lead to a lot of complexities, which it would be difficult for you to understand and for me to explain in this short span of time. So restraining ourselves to the High Court, these are the three essential reliefs that one would seek. After this, one can also look at Order 9 for understanding as to what happens if the parties appear and what would be the effect of non-appearance of parties. So whilst you're taking out an application for interim reliefs, the next situation is where even after having given notice to the other side, The parties may appear or may not appear. Now, in the present scenario, the courts are calling upon the plaintiff's advocates to give at least a 48-hour notice to the other side to come and represent. In the event that the court feels that proper notice has not been given, then it may ask the plaintiffs to give another notice and slate the matter for hearing on another date, having given appropriate notice. If the court is satisfied that the service has been done and they haven't, then it may hear the matter ex parte. In the event that it is satisfied that it is not satisfied that the proper notice was given, it may also hear you ex parte provided you file an affidavit of service through the clerk who has served the notice on the other side. That may help the court to determine whether service was done, because that is an affidavit on oath and the clerk puts it on oath to say that he has served the party himself. Or through the mode, either it is by registered AD, by courier or whatever, that documentary evidence is also attached in the affidavit of service and is placed before the court. Confirming that service, the court may go ahead and hear this matter for the interlocutory orders. This particular application can either be granted depending on the case or may be rejected. Till now, before we proceed further, the situation in the High Court was that for an interlocutory application, one would require to take out a notice of motion. However, now, by virtue of a circular dated 26th August 2019, the court has directed that all interim applications would be by way of interim applications and not motions. There would be now, the nomenclature now used would be interim application and not a notice of motion. So that is a change that has been sought to be brought out in the new rules and the directions which have been given by the High Court. What has happened is that both the appellate side and the original side would now have only an interim application as opposed to different nomenclatures used for different interim applications such as motions or applications per se, which was being used by the appellate side earlier. So now we have a standard format of interim applications. Having said that, this particular aspect up to the interlocutory stage is a major stage in the conduct of a suit. If one gets an order in one's favor, it is not necessary that it would end. The defendant may go in appeal from that order, which goes before the division bench. And if unhappy about the same, it may also go in further appeal to the Supreme Court. Similarly, if the relief is not granted, the plaintiff may go in appeal from the interlocutory order right up to the Supreme Court. Now, the appeal is provided under Order 43, read with 104 of the CPC. So if one has to look at the appeals, then one has to look at the provisions of Order 43 along with 104 of the CPC. Can I point out that whilst considering this, one can also definitely look at a judgment which is reported in 1981 4 SCC page 8 in the case of Shah Babulal Khimji versus Jayaben Kanya, which essentially lays down the definition of a judgment. So what is a judgment of the court from which an appeal can be preferred is more particularly mentioned in this case. So whilst considering an appeal or going in for appeal, one must by default look at this judgment so as to confirm whether an appeal lies from such an order. Now, having said that, this particular aspect ends the first stage of litigation. So once you get an interim order or not get an interim order, the first stage of litigation ends here. Then the case comes up for filing of written statement, etc., which is a second leg in the conduct of a suit. After the conclusion of the interlocutory orders, the court then directs the defendants to file their written statements, which is given within a particular period of time. It would depend on the kind of suit which is there. Anything between 4 weeks, 6 weeks, depends on the discretion, it may be more. And it can vary as per the discretion of the court. Insofar as the written statement is concerned, that they are now looking at the written statement. One is filing of the written statement. Let us now go towards the side of the defendant and consider what the lawyer will have to see for filing of the written statement. So that aspect can be looked at from the CPC under Order 8. So Order 8 in the CPC gives you detailed description of what a written statement and counterclaim ought to be. Along with this, you need to look at chapters 7, rules 88 to 106 of the High Court rules. Once you read both of these, you will have an idea as to what should be the content of your written statement. Having considered the provisions under law, the lawyer must then simply look at the facts of the matter. A written statement also, like plaint, is a statement of facts supported by documents. So whatever facts the defendant has to state in response to the case made out by the plaint is what is required to be put in the written statement. Apart from these facts, and in support of these contentions, if the defendant has documents, then those documents are required to be attached along with the written statement, and that would be taken as a whole case of the defendant. One important aspect in a written statement which one must keep in mind is that all allegations, contentions which have been raised in the plaint against the defendants have to be specifically denied. So if there is any particular allegation with regard to fraud, with regard to misappropriation of goods or otherwise, that has to be specifically not only denied, but whatever your case is to that must be specifically pleaded after giving sufficient particulars so as to make out your case and for the court to understand what the case of the defendant is. This is all that is required to be put in the written statement at the stage of filing of the written statement. You don't need to add any law or submissions in a written statement. Going a little further, a written statement may also be containing a counterclaim or a set-off. Both these are put in so as to reduce litigation, to avoid multifarious suits between the same parties, either having the same cause of action or another cause of action. So now if one has to look at a counterclaim, supposedly if it is to be filed along with the written statement, then in non-commercial suits, it has to be the written statement cum counterclaim has to be filed within 90 days. And in case of commercial suits, as per the Commercial Courts Act 2015, within 120 days. Let me point out here that these 120 days are mandatory under the Commercial Courts Act 2015. However, in non-commercial suits, these 90 days can be extended with the leave of the court. Now, having said that, this is with regard to filing of the written statement. We now go a step further. And insofar as the CPC is concerned, it talks about Order 8 Rule 10 talks about non-appearance by a defendant, and Orders 9 Rule 13 talk about setting aside of an ex parte decree. So if you are a defendant and an advocate representing the defendant, these two provisions are very crucial. So in the event you have got a case appearing for the defendant and had not appeared during interlocutory stage, then this particular provision would be very crucial for you, especially Order 9 Rule 13, where if there is an ex parte order already passed, then it lays down provisions and circumstances where you can ask for setting aside of those ex parte orders. So that is the next part, where in a conduct of a suit, the party who is coming and appearing for the defendant is required to look up these sections and provisions. The next aspect is the matters arising pending suits. So there are several things that can arise pending suit. So once your interlocutory reliefs are received, then there may be certain amendments which may be required to be made in the plaint, for some certain facts which you have failed to bring forward in the plaint earlier, or a relief that you are seeking for that may be sought to be amended, which can be allowed, and for which the provisions are set out in Chapter 11, Rule 150 to 189 of the High Court rules. It may include death of party, it may include amendments to the plaint, the averments or reliefs, etc. So this is with regard to matters pending suit. After this stage is completed, one looks at the production of documents by parties and examinations of the parties by court, which is provided under Order 10. And it can be also seen in Chapter 20 of the High Court rules. It contains the proceedings at the hearings of the suit till the decree. So this particular chapter in the High Court rules covers that aspects with regard to examination of the parties and what is a first hearing. Now, after this, a very crucial and important aspect comes. So once you have filed your written statement, and you have, or even before filing of the written statement, there is one more stage which can be brought out. It can be either before or after. It doesn't matter. But this is provided under Order 11, which is the discovery and inspection of documents by the parties. So generally, if one is diligent enough, one would consider giving that notice for discovery and inspection prior to the filing of the written statement and seek from the plaintiffs all these documents which he has referred to and relied upon in his plaint, so as to respond to the plaint in an appropriate manner with your appropriate documents in the written statement. If this step is followed, then your written statement would be a full-proof written statement to that extent. Nevertheless, if there is a short span of time where you would have had to file the written statement and you have filed it, you can still ask for these inspection of documents, get the thing, and then add your the facts to the written statement at a subsequent date by seeking leave of the court. Inspection of documents is a crucial aspect. It shortens the litigation to a great extent. By seeking inspection by way of a letter of documents which they have referred to, after verifying, you can also send off a letter with regard to interrogatories in form of questions which you would want to put to the plaintiff with regard to the facts of the case. Similarly, the plaintiff also can send you a list of interrogatories on the basis of which you have filed your written statement. So both parties can, in fact, exchange interrogatories and ask for inspection of documents. This is a very, very crucial aspect, and it reduces your trial. So your trial depends upon what you have disclosed, what you have admitted, what you haven't admitted, what you need to prove, what you don't need to prove during your trial is all determined by virtue of the answering of these interrogatories and or notice to produce documents, admit facts. All this is covered under Order 11. There is a situation where by virtue of these interrogatories, a party may admit certain facts and may admit certain documents. Once that is admitted, that particular aspect is not required to be proved by either of the parties. So essentially, this particular thing is taken care of under the CPC under Order 12. So one can look at the admission aspect as to what is an admission by a party insofar as the interrogatories are concerned, and what aspects of the matter are either admitted, what documents are admitted, etc. So that particular provision needs to be considered during the pendency of the proceeding. The next provision is with regard to Order 13. So Order 13 is with regard to the production, impounding, and return of documents. So this is essentially a proceeding or a stage where the court decides which of the documents are required to be accepted and which are the documents which are required to be returned. So having said that, the next step is an important step, which is the settlement of issues, which is determination of the suit on issues of law or issues with regard to whatever is agreed between the parties. This part of your suit, which is the settlement of issues, is a very crucial part. Generally, the court asks both the parties to submit draft issues to the court. The draft issues are then looked at and settled, and whichever the court feels that this is actually the issue between the party is then selected or reframed by the court and then put up as an issue. These issues ultimately have to be proved or disproved by the parties. So when one goes to the trial, one has to focus on proving or disproving the issues. So if you are a plaintiff and you have to prove a particular issue, then you need to lead evidence with regard to that. And if you have to disprove the issue, then that issue, the defendant has to lead sufficient evidence to disprove that issue, either by way of examination of a witness or by producing documents or leading certain evidences by way of third-party evidence or otherwise to disprove that particular issue which is raised by the court against the party. So essentially, that is the way one has to proceed so far as the trial is concerned. After the issues are framed, the parties are required to file their affidavit of documents and affidavit of evidence. So at this time, what is required is, in the High Court, we need to collect all the original documents and prepare an affidavit with regard to those and submit it to the court with regard to the list of documents that you have referred to and relied upon. There are some documents which are essentially attached to the plaint, but there are certain documents which you may have referred to and relied upon in the plaint, which also need to be added at this stage and brought before the court. So all the documents that a party refers to and relies upon is added in the list of documents. The affidavit of evidence is something which you need to file. And this is a topic which is the other topic where the trial of the suit is concerned. I will take it up in that. But that is where the next stage comes, where parties have to file their affidavit of evidence and affidavit of documents to start the trial. And the next thing is, ultimately, having got all of these things together, both the plaintiffs and the defendants, when they file both these documents and affidavits, the matter is kept for directions, and the court decides to hear the suit and examine the parties. So, having said this, I have tried to give you an idea, an overview of the conduct of a suit in civil matters. This is not the same procedure in criminal matters. I hope this has been useful to all the listeners.